Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and the title of today's presentation is The Mystery of Angel Hair, also known as Cheveux de la Sainte Vierge in France, or in Italy, spun glass. It goes by different names, but it's described as being this sort of cotton candy spiderweb-like substance that's ejected from UFOs. What's very interesting is when you consider the number of UFO sightings, these angel hair cases are very rare. There's only a handful, really, and we still don't know exactly what it is or how it's formed. So that's why I wanted to do this video and just explore some of these cases. I've collected about 20 cases from all over the world. A few are well known, some I don't think are well known. They're certainly all very interesting and provide sort of a unique insight, I think, into the UFO phenomenon. First case I want to talk about is actually very well known, and this occurred over Oloron, France. It occurred on October 17th, 1952, and involved many, many witnesses. One main witness is Jean-Yves Prigent. He was the superintendent of Oloron High School and was in his home with his family, and they ran outside and saw this very large cylindrical shaped object. It was quite some distance away, but what was even more astonishing is there was about 30 other objects darting around it. And these objects were hovering, they were moving in zigzag formations, and sometimes would make sparks of electricity, like bolts of lightning going between them. And as all of this is going on, this weird angel hair substance started to fall. As Jean-Yves says, and I'm quoting, "A cottony cloud of these strange shapes was floating against the blue sky. All these strange objects left an abundant trail behind them, which slowly fell to the ground as it disappeared." So there was a lot of it. It was hanging on trees, on roofs, on telephone wires. It was described as being very gossamer-like with fine fibers of wool or nylon. And it lasted several hours, actually. A bunch of people saw this. They gathered samples of it and rolled it into little balls, at which point it would become gelatinous and evaporate. The gym teacher gathered a huge handful of stuff and said it was covering the school field. Another teacher took a sample of it and tried to burn it, and it kind of burned very easily, like cellophane is how he described it. The science teacher, Monsieur Poulet, was able to gather a big 36-foot long strand on a stick, and he wound it all up on the end of a stick, and it just simply evaporated. So while they did try to save samples, they were not able to. This substance dissolved fairly quickly. In their case, it did last a number of hours, but completely dissolved following that. Pretty much a good portion of the town of Oloron saw this, but it was also seen by people in neighboring areas. A bunch of hunters in the Josbe Valley saw it, and also in the nearby town of Gerance, they also saw it, including the mayor of the town. So this was a very widely viewed incident, and it got a lot of publicity. Researchers later found out that the nearby radar station at Mont de Marc actually caught these objects on radar, detected, quote, unusual activity. So that was good verification, corroboration. Despite this, there was quite a bit of skepticism. People said, oh, perhaps these people saw spider webs. And this, of course, upset the witnesses and certainly didn't explain how this substance was able to dissolve so quickly, nor did it explain the UFOs. But the whole incident did get a lot of publicity. It was in newspapers and is a very early angel hair case, and really one of many all across the world. It was only 10 days after the Oloron case when there was another very similar incident not too far away in Gaillac, France. This occurred on October 27, 1952 at around 5 p.m. One lady, she was in her home when she heard her chickens outside acting strangely. She ran outside and described pretty much what the other witnesses saw, a huge cylindrical shaped object with scores of flying saucers zigzagging around it. They were about 1,200 feet in altitude, so pretty low, and were out there for quite some time, long enough for her to call out her neighbors. In fact, by the time these objects moved away, more than 100 people had seen them. The whole display lasted about 20 minutes, and during this time it sent down volumes of this weird substance, angel hair. Witnesses described it as looking sort of like spun glass wool, and when gathered again it became gelatinous. It turned jelly-like and just dissolved, and no samples were saved. However, again, they did get official confirmation from the local weather observatory, where witnesses there described seeing, quote, a silvery metallic disc. So those are two cases from France. Here's a case from Australia. We'll just move through time here, going 1 year later, October 1953, pretty much exactly 1 year later. And in this case, a sample was saved. And researcher Brian Boldman is one of the experts on angel hair. He did a whole study of it. And he says, a sample was recovered and made available for laboratory analysis. The examination revealed that the substance consisted of a nylon-like amorphous mass with traces of magnesium, calcium, boron, and silicone. Since then, the original material, which was kept in an airtight container, shrank from 3 to a mere ½ inch without residue. So yeah, it's very hard to collect samples of this, even harder to conduct a scientific analysis, but this analysis did detect these trace materials. Here's another case which I find very interesting because it occurred literally less than 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now. This occurred over the San Fernando Valley in Reseda, California on November 16th, 1953. Witnesses described seeing a huge silver sphere racing at low altitude across the San Fernando Valley. It was being chased by 3 Air Force jets, and as it zipped away, it ejected a huge volume of angel hair. And this angel hair fell on about a 2-block radius, covering homes, cars, telephone wires, trees, yards, streets. Covered one guy's bakery truck completely. And I was actually able to talk to the witness's daughter, who confirmed that, oh yeah, that was my dad's truck, and he was the one who described this. So yeah, very close to where I am right now. Another witness, Miss Corsten, she says, and I'm quoting, "It fell onto bushes and jumped out to passerbys as hair does to a magnetized comb." So it appears to have sort of a static charge to it, which might be significant. She grabbed a sample and said it just dissolved in her hands. But she watched as the Air Force actually showed up. Air Force officers came and tried to gather a 12-foot-long strip that was hanging from a tree. And she doesn't say what happened to this material, but other people arrived as well to study it. Engineers from Lockheed and Douglas Aircraft arrived, and they were reportedly skeptical and, quote, sneering, but left the scene silent and thoughtful. So they came away apparently convinced that something was real. It looks like samples were gathered, but we don't know what happened to them in that case. 1954, 1 year later, was really the big year for angel hair. There was a number of very high-quality cases, and probably the first that year occurred in Puente, California. This occurred on February 1st, 1954. The witness was Mrs. Daly, and she saw this object fly overhead over her home, and it ejected a volume of this angel hair. She said it was very shiny and very light, and it just floated down and again covered all the trees and bushes and telephone wires in the fields. She tried to gather a sample, but as she says, it vanished when I tried to touch it with my hands. She called Mount Wilson Observatory, but they were very skeptical and of no help whatsoever, unfortunately. But 1954 was a huge year, and particularly October. So we're going to move back to France now, to the town of Groslay, France. This occurred on October 13th, 1954, when crowds of people in the village of Groslay watched this huge white disc-shaped object. It was hovering and darting around, and then suddenly it seemed to explode. As one witness says, Mr. Karanak, he's a tanner, as he says, I had been following the bizarre craft for several seconds when it exploded in full flight. At the same time, a circular object, very much smaller and silvery, seemed to spurt out from the mass and continued straight towards the south, where it soon disappeared, while the burst fragments of the soft disk scattered out through the sky in a multitude of shapeless fragments, which began to fall gently like shreds of cloth or paper. He observed this through binoculars, actually, and this huge volume of this material slowly drifted down, covering trees, telephone wires, and the ground, and it clung like cobwebs, the witnesses said, but it wilted and sort of withered away very quickly, especially if you tried to touch it, it would just melt away. They did manage to gather some samples, however, which they sent to the police. The police sent them off to a chemist, and the chemist wasn't able to do a proper chemical analysis because the substance just evaporated too quickly. He was able to take a small sample of it and subject it to a flame, and said it burned very quickly without any vapors, no smoke, but wasn't able to get any chemical analysis done, unfortunately. 5 days after that incident, there was another incident in France. This is a very widely viewed incident again. This occurred in the town of Vienna, France, October 18th, 1954. These white objects were again zigzagging over the town and literally covering it in this weird substance we know as angel hair. As one witness says, his name is Monsieur Lalonde. As he says, about a half an hour later, a sort of rain of cobwebs came down on the airfield, as thick as closely woven cloth. Handfuls were falling on the ground, on the hangar, on the airplanes, and we started to pick up great bunches. It felt like holding rubber threads, very fine, very soft to the touch, which matted together and at once evaporated in our fingers without leaving any sensation at all, any odor, or the least trace. We had the impression that it was the heat of our hands that made the material melt. He was able to gather a large sample, which he placed in a sealed container and put it in a cool place. However, when he opened it up the next day, the container was completely empty. Again, very hard to save this material, which really begs the question, what is it? What are we dealing with here? Here is probably one of the ultimate cases really in the world, certainly perhaps the most widely viewed, certainly of modern times. This occurred on October 27, 1954 in Italy, in Tuscany actually, during a soccer game. Well, they call it football. But this occurred at the Stadio Artemi Granchi, which is a huge stadium, during a football game. And there were about 10,000 fans in this stadium at the time this incident occurred, when a number of UFOs, at least two, perhaps more, showed up and started darting around, hovering, And as soon as they appeared, an eerie silence fell over the crowd. And then as these objects started moving around, the silence transformed into a huge roar as all the fans started shouting and jumping up and down and looking at this thing and pointing. And it appeared to be some kind of display. These objects must have wanted to be seen because they're over a stadium with 10,000 people. And they started emitting this weird material known as angel hair. And there's a lot of witnesses, of course. One witness was actually one of the players. Footballer Ardicho Magnini says, and I'm quoting, "I remember everything from A to Z. It was something that looked like an egg that was moving slowly, slowly. Everyone was looking up, and also there was some glitter coming down from the sky, silver glitter. We were astonished. We had never seen anything like it before. We were absolutely shocked." Another witness was Romolo Tucci. As he says, "In those years, everybody was talking about aliens. Everybody was talking UFOs, and we had the experience. We saw them. We saw them directly, for real." Another witness was Gigi Bani. As he says, "They were moving very fast, and then they just stopped. It all lasted a couple of minutes. I would like to describe them as being like Cuban cigars. I think they were extraterrestrial, that's what I believe, and there's no other explanation I can give myself." Another witness is Roberto Pinotti. He actually became a UFO investigator as an adult, but at the time he was just a kid. And he says, and I quote, "I remember in broad daylight seeing the roofs of the houses in Florence covered in this white substance for 1 hour, and like snow, it just evaporated." Another witness, this was seen not only over the stadium, but all over Italy, actually. Not only on that day, but in the days that followed. Another witness was Gennaro Lucetti and Pietro Lastrucci. They stood on the balcony of their hotel in St. Mark's Square in Venice, Italy, and saw two what they described as shining spindles flying across the sky, and again leaving a trail of this angel hair. There was a journalist, a very well-known journalist who worked at a high-profile newspaper. His name was Giorgio Battini, and his phone started ringing off the hook from people who were seeing this stuff. He says he received over 100 calls, and he went outside and actually observed these objects himself. He described them as silver globes. And he went outside to investigate further and saw huge volumes of this angel hair just draped all over this forest. And he gathered a bunch of samples and sent them to the Institute of Chemical Analysis at the University of Florence. As it turned out, a number of other people had done the same darn thing. An engineering student by the name of Alfredo Jacopozzi also sent large samples to the University of Florence, and these samples were in fact able to be chemically analyzed. Professor Cosi and Professor Giovanni Caneri were able to conduct a chemical analysis of the angel hair. They subjected the material to a spectrographic analysis and concluded that the angel hair contained the elements boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium. So again, we have verification, because this is pretty much exactly what was found in other cases. So that's a really remarkable case. Another extraordinary case, which makes me wonder, what's going on here, occurred on the same year, 1954. It was about a month later, November 30th, 1954, and this was over Marysville, Ohio, specifically over Jerome Elementary School. It was a bright, beautiful, sunny day. The kids had been granted an extra recess. There were some 60 kids out there on the playground when this metallic object showed up, It had either portholes or lights on it. It was very bright, almost too bright to look at times. And it was darting around. Finally, one of the kids goes and gets the teacher, or actually it was the principal, Principal Rodney Warwick. And he runs out and he couldn't believe his eyes. As he says, "I have never seen anything like it." And he said it was so bright he actually couldn't even look at it. It was too bright for his eyes. And as he called out for another teacher, Mrs. Dittmar, to come running out and take a look, and she came running out, but right before she arrived, this object darts away, and this is when it leaves an enormous quantity of angel hair, which fell down for like the next hour directly over the school and actually the surrounding area. As Miss Dittmar says, and I'm quoting, "It was the most beautiful, soft, white-looking tufts, like cotton, slowly floating to the ground. The substance had long fibers, very much as if someone had taken strands of angel hair and pushed some in bunches towards the middle or end, leaving a trail of fibers attached to it." So these were long, long strands. The children were gathering big bunches of it and bringing it to the teachers, and they were pulling on it. They said it was actually really quite durable, tough to break, but if you touched it on one end, it would curl up into a little ball and disappear. It came in two main forms, big long strands and what looked like cottony balls, and it covered the complete playground. And actually, for a couple of miles around the entire school. Miss Dittmar and Rodney Warwick, the principal, started experimenting with it. As Miss Dittmar says, "It was very fine and soft to touch. It did not stick to our hands, but when we held two ends and pulled, it stretched without tearing. Where it stretched, it had a shiny appearance. The part we held between our fingers very quickly seemed to go to nothing. However, we could roll it between our fingers in a very, very tiny ball. In a short while, our hands had a green stain on them. I soon washed my hands in warm water, and the stain rinsed quickly off." The principal, Rodney Warwick, also got his hands stained green from handling this stuff. He decided not to wash his hands so he could see what would happen. And he said his hands felt cold and clammy for a short duration, at which point the green stain just disappeared and the substance presumably evaporated. He says it reminded him very much of asbestos fibers. That's what it looked like to him, though he made it clear that it was not asbestos. So this covered the school for about 3 miles around. As Miss Dittmar says, "When we left the school, we noticed it clinging to the grass, the flagpole, and some on the cars. I believe the thing that impressed me even further was what we saw as we drove the 3 miles to Columbus Road. The telephone wires were completely woven shut, as if hands had carefully spread angel hair out very evenly. Not only this, but the telephone wires were connected to the electric wires on the other side of the road, so that it was like a misty canopy over the road for 3 miles. So yeah, this is a huge volume of this substance, whatever it is. The principal, Rodney Warwick, gathered a sample and gave it to the local newspaper, the Journal Tribune, and reporters there immediately sent it off to Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus for an analysis, though unfortunately we never heard back from the Air Force regarding what the substance was. But this case caused a lot of publicity. It was investigated by Leonard Stringfield, by James McDonald, also by Professor C.A. Maney, who actually got to interview the teacher and some of the kids. As he says, "The letters of the children are most interesting, each telling in his own words what he or she saw. These letters support in an impressive way the more detailed statements of the teachers. There's no question in my mind of the sincerity and the truthfulness of these statements. So this is an incredible case, and I'm wondering if this was an intentional display, or was this substance an accidental byproduct? And the reason I say that is because of the previous incident where these objects were apparently showing themselves over a stadium and ejecting this material. It seems like that's exactly what they did in the Jerome Elementary School case. And in fact, that's what would happen almost exactly 1 year later in 1955. This next incident that I'd like to talk about occurred at Whitsett Elementary School, again an elementary school. This is in North Carolina. It was on October 27th, 1955, and everyone was out on the playground playing when these objects showed up. The students came running inside and got the teacher, Mr. Lambeth, and pulled him outside. Other teachers came out as well and saw 8 shiny silver spherical shaped objects. It's interesting that these objects are often described as spherical. And they were darting around and moving in all these patterns and moving across the sky. He observed them through binoculars. At least 120 students were there watching this, most of the school. And Lambeth was actually a combat pilot in World War II. He had flown 46 combat missions, so he's very familiar with aircraft and could not identify these things. So as they're watching, these objects sort of spit out these white bits of angel hair, which were described as being in about 2 to 3 inches in length. It reminded Lambeth really of Christmas decorations, is how he described it. Another witness, Miss Newton, said it covered acres around and reminded her of cotton candy. And this is when something really interesting happened. All the kids were running around, picking up these things, bringing it to the teachers. Well, one kid reached down and scooped it up and started to eat it. Lambeth ran over to him to try to stop him, but he was too late, and the kid actually put this in his mouth and ate a sample of angel hair. As far as I know, this is the only person who's ever done that, that I know of at least. And the kid said it tasted bad, it tasted salty. He didn't like it. It wasn't cotton candy. So that point's, interesting to what this might actually be. It tasted kind of salty, he said. Lambeth gathered a sample and tried to burn it with a match. It burned easily. Of course, this ended school for the day. Everyone was sent home. And the principal Lambeth, gathered a sample and had it sent to a science lab, Burlington Labs. And they told him they were not able to identify it. They did not know what it was. They couldn't identify it as any known substance. They thought it was biological and that it might actually be spider webs. And they suggested he send it off to a biologist. So that's what he did. He sent it to a biologist, and the biologist said, no, this is not spider webs. The strands were far too uniform to be spider webs, and there should be evidence of spiders. And since none of the witnesses described any spiders, the biologist ruled out spider webs. So the case did receive quite a bit of publicity, and in fact, Lambeth did receive a call from the Italian Navy, who expressed a strong interest in the case. At some point, the United States Air Force sent over a representative, I guess you would call it, who tried to actually debunk the case. They sent over Captain Murray Thornton, and Murray Thornton released a statement saying, I'm inclined to think that the silver balls were reflections of the sun on whatever the stuff was at higher altitudes. So he couldn't explain the angel hair, and tried to explain the UFOs as silver reflections off of the whatever the stuff was, clouds. Well, Lambeth wasn't having it. He's a trained observer and had been in the military, as I said, and flown all these missions. And as Lambeth says, and I'm quoting, "It would ease a person's mind to believe that, but I'm not convinced it fits all the facts. The silver things we saw were moving in all directions, and there was hardly any wind or turbulence that would have moved the wispy stuff like that. Besides, the teachers and the students said the objects looked too solid to be just reflections." So again, we're just left with more questions than answers here. One interesting end note to this case is Lambeth says that he did have a sample which disappeared. It's not clear if it just disappeared or was stolen, but as he says, there was funny business going on. So I think he's pretty much implying that this sample was taken from him. At any rate, there are quite a few cases, and as we move on through the years, there are more. There's a case from Portales, New Mexico, which was kind of interesting. This occurred over a period of 2 days, October 23rd and 24th in 1957. And UFOs were seen afterwards, but not directly in conjunction. But what's really interesting is how much substance there was. This was a huge, huge volume of angel hair. There were strands that were well over 50 feet long, and it was reported over an area of 100 square miles. So there was a lot of it. In fact, it was so thick, farmers were having a real hard time with it. It was interfering with their ability to harvest their cornfields. So they were able to gather samples, and the samples showed that it was not radioactive, but did not yield any other details. And again, there was speculation that this could be spider webs, because spiders are known to migrate through the sky, by the way. Very large clouds of spiders have been seen. So that's one of the theories that keeps getting floated to describe this stuff, but I just don't think it accounts for the evidence. Here's an incident which occurred in Évora, Portugal, on November 2nd, 1959. 2 disc-shaped objects were seen over the town, and angel hair was collected in this case and analyzed by microscope by a local school director, and later by armed forces technicians and scientists at the University of Lisbon. So definitely there have been cases where samples have been taken and studied. The results weren't revealed, as far as I know, in that case. But there's many other cases. Australia has quite a few cases. One occurred on August 6, 1961, and at Mount Hale, there was at least 10 witnesses who saw 12 spherical objects, silver metallic. Again, it's that same silver metallic sphere that so many witnesses are describing in these cases. And as according to one report on this case, and I'm quoting, "The objects gave off a white substance which took on various shapes whilst falling to the ground. I managed to pick up some of the substance. It was of snow-white color and appeared to be in a fine mesh. It crumbled very easily." Another witness, Mrs. Payne, says, "I picked up one of the streamers, but it vanished in my hands as it touched my skin." So 1 year later, almost exactly on June 6, 1961, there was another Australian case, this time in New South Wales. 6 objects left a trail of, quote, shiny web-like filaments. Jean Williams and her daughters witnessed it and watched it fall to the ground and actually disappear before hitting the ground. But all over the world, here's a case from Entre Rios province in Argentina. It occurred on January 17th, 1963. And the most interesting aspect of this case is that the substance was subjected to a chemical analysis. And as researcher Brian Boldman, an angel hair expert, says, and I'm quoting, a formation passed over Entre Rios, and observers recovered vitreous particles that had fallen from them. These particles were found to be an amalgam of silicon, boron, calcium, and magnesium, just the same as has been found in similar circumstances in other parts of the world. So yeah, it's these same four substances: silicon, boron, calcium, and magnesium. So whatever the answers are to angel hair obviously lies in that direction. So here's another Australian case. August 29th, 1969. This was in Grafton, again in New South Wales. Witness, a surfer, saw this angel hair just falling down out of the sky. He didn't see any UFOs, but did later find out that there were sightings earlier in the area. So sometimes it takes a long time for this stuff to fall down. It can fall down for an hour following a UFO sighting or longer. And as this witness says, and I'm quoting, I began rolling up copious amounts of the material in my hands. The filaments diminished in size, and then the material eventually dissipated into nothing visible and leaving no trace. It gave the impression of rapid sublimation from solid to gas, but no vapors or odors were noticed. He quickly ran home and got some glass jars and ran back to the scene of the location, but by the time he got back, there was no trace of the angel hair. Another Australian case occurred at Maslins Beach. This is in South Australia. It occurred on March 15th, 1971. Again, there was numerous objects. The witnesses who saw the angel hair in this case described it as, quote, fairy floss. At any rate, they again weren't able to save a sample because it melted upon contact. So these cases move all the way into modern times. Some years later, February 10th, 1978, a large number of these angel hair fibers fell from the sky for a period of over 2 hours. This was in New Zealand, near the town of Nauru. Another Australian case, 1998, pretty recently. Eunice Stanfield and Nolene Mosetic were two witnesses. They saw numerous silvery spheres again. They counted about 20 of these objects, and they ejected this weird angel hair. As one of the witnesses, Nolene, says, it was extremely light, whitish, and strong, like cotton, requiring a good tug to break. So it's interesting that this substance can dissolve so quickly, and yet often witnesses describe it as being pretty durable and strong. Another Australian case is fairly recent, August 5th, the year 2000. This is at Old Noarlunga, Australia. Multiple witnesses in different locations saw this silvery UFO, and it ejected this material. One guy said it covered his house, his yard, his fence. Another group of witnesses were on the beach, said it covered the beach. Or another man, he was in his house, and he saw it coming towards his house, and he first thought it was a fog bank until it actually came and started draping itself all over his house and yard. And again, just stayed there for a short while and disappeared. Must be a very interesting sight to see. So yeah, there are modern cases, and we do have some cases reaching back in early history. So it appears that this is a phenomenon that has been going on for perhaps millennia. One of the earliest cases I could find occurred in 1833 in Rahway, New Jersey, when people reported seeing what they thought were meteors in the sky, except following this sighting of meteors, people also saw what they described as a gelatinous material or lumps of jelly falling from the sky. One witness described it as, quote, the coagulated white of an egg. So this fell over a wide area, actually. Witnesses in Newark, New Jersey saw it as well and described it as a soft, soapy-like substance. And in West Point, New York, people saw it, and they described it as being similar to, quote, boiled starch. So this actually did make the newspapers and was well publicized, and as witnesses told the newspaper reporters, the substance evaporated very quickly and very easily. Another very early case occurred on November 21st in 1898 in Montgomery, Alabama, when reportedly large quantities of this substance fell. It was described again as being very spider web-like, but reminded people of asbestos, and also seemed to have a phosphorescent quality to it, sort of a shiny quality, which again we hear in other cases. And another possible incident of angel hair, and perhaps the most widely viewed in history, would be the Fatima incident in Fatima, Portugal on August 1917. And this is a very well-known incident. I've talked about it in other of my videos. And it involved 3 young girls who had an apparition of what appeared to be the Virgin Mary, or the Lady of Fatima, as they called her, who gave them prophecies and promised a display. And people started to gather and actually saw amazing things happened. On the second day of the event, there was more than 18,000 people who had gathered to watch, and many of the witnesses described what appears to be angel hair. They described it as, quote, falling flowers or petals or flakes. But on the third day of this whole incident, the crowd had grown to more than 30,000. And again, we saw a wide range of phenomena, UFOs and angel hair, apparently. And one witness actually left a pretty detailed description, as he says, and I'm quoting, "As the people stared at this strange sight, they soon noticed that the falling, glistening globules, contrary to the laws of perspective, grow smaller and smaller as they near them. And when they reach out their hands and hats to catch them, they find that they have melted away." So yeah, this sounds very much like angel hair. As Jacques Vallée pointed out, this, quote, religious miracle, which was widely believed to be at the time, has many of the elements of a UFO encounter, including angel hair. So those are the angel hair cases, and it's pretty interesting, and there's been quite a bit of study on this. I collected all these cases in my book, Not From Here, Volume 2, because I find them so fascinating. I did kind of a study on them, but I have to tell you, this phenomena has been researched in depth by a number of accomplished researchers who have some very interesting insights into it. For example, Jerome Clark and Lauren Coleman remarked upon angel hair's sort of similarities to a substance we know as ectoplasm. Ectoplasm is a substance that's sort of reportedly emitted from mediums, psychic mediums, and used to form apparitions. It's a very wispy, amorphous, cloud-like substance, which apparently does have some similarities. I'm not sure if it's the same thing, but as Jerome Clark and Lauren Coleman write, and I'm quoting, "Certainly people are reporting something. Sometimes it spews forth various materials which invariably prove to be conventional earthly substances. The sole exception is the mysterious angel hair, which, like the ectoplasm of spiritualist literature, to which it is apparently related, disintegrates within a very short time. Consequently, no one has ever been able to study it carefully." Well, now we have actually been able to study it, but at the time there was a lot of speculation about what this was. In fact, pioneering UFO researcher Harold T. Wilkins, who has written a number of books about the phenomena, was well aware of it, of angel hair and UFOs. And as he writes, and I'm quoting, is it jettisoned to sterilize the air or render radioactive fallout innocuous? Has it any connection with their propulsion in our atmosphere? And this seems to be the main theory. There are two main theories. One is spider webs, because as I said, there are clouds of spiders which have been seen in the stars, and spider webs can fall in very large quantities. But I think researchers have pretty much ruled out spider webs because spider webs do not dissolve upon contact and don't have a huge static charge usually and aren't formed by UFOs. They're formed by spiders. And it just doesn't account for the fact that this stuff has been directly tied to UFOs. So most researchers believe it has something to do with UFO propulsion and the fact that these vehicles have sort of perhaps a plasma field surrounding them. One researcher who has looked into this is Aimé Michel, a pioneering French researcher who's written a number of books and investigated cases such as the Oloron case in France. And as he writes, the nature of this material is a complete mystery. Is angel hair to be considered as something intentional, or is it produced accidentally? Should the production of the substance be cited as a highly significant performance by a UFO, or should we regard it merely as something like the ice that forms on an airplane's wings at high altitude? We might imagine that under some conditions, the means of propulsion used by the saucers can produce a polymerization of atoms of the surrounding atmosphere, forming a sort of high molecular weight plastic that solidifies in filaments. This could be thought of as a peculiar and unstable sort of atmospheric ice, which can crystallize out of the cold upper air only under the unusual conditions existing in the vicinity of a flying saucer. When the substance falls to the ground, normal warmth would soon depolymerize it and release the atoms in their original gaseous state, so that in the end there would remain nothing but the ordinary gases of the atmosphere. This would explain the futility of the chemical analysis attempted up to this time. Of course, now we have had chemical analysis, and we'll get a little bit more into that in just a second. But Aimé Michel really owes his speculations to a true pioneer of the UFO propulsion, who is Lieutenant Jean Plantier, also from France, who wrote a book about UFOs and his theories on UFO propulsion. And his theories seem to have held valid because he predicted a number of things, such as when UFOs are photographed, they often appear to be not completely symmetrical and will have an off-center spot. And he also predicted other details, apparently including angel hair. And as according to Plantier, and I'm going to just quote Aimé Michel here, because Aimé Michel is paraphrasing Lieutenant Jean Plantier, quote, the ionization of the atmosphere in the wake of the craft would be sufficient because of the colossal intensity of the field to produce ultra-heavy positive particles, which in contact with molecules of oxygen, nitrogen, water, etc., of the surrounding air, would exhibit novel chemical reactions. The product of these reactions, the famous angel's hair, would disintegrate as the ionization disappeared. So yeah, we know it's not spider webs, and I think Lieutenant Plantier was onto the right track here. Could be that what we're dealing with is really nothing more than sort of a weird byproduct of these UFO engines. I mentioned Brian Boldman before. He's one of the leading researchers into angel hair. He wrote an article called An Analysis of Angel Hair from 1947 to the year 2000 and devotes much of the article to proving that this substance is not spiderwebs. As he says, it is a genuine constituent of the UFO phenomenon and worthy of study. And he's really focused on the very few chemical analyses that have been done of angel hair. And as Brian Boldman says, and I quote, "It is interesting that in multiple cases, widespread in time and location, the same elements were detected: silicon, calcium, magnesium, and boron. Angel hair has been called borosilicate glass due to these constituents. While silicon, calcium, and magnesium are common elements in the Earth's crust, boron is not. It constitutes only 3/10 parts per million of the crust, making it relatively rare. Why it should turn up in these samples from 3 different continents years apart is unknown. Boron absorbs neutrons and is used to shield and control nuclear reactions, adding to the speculation that angel hair is a byproduct of a nuclear propulsion system. Other elements found in angel hair include potassium, silicon, calcium, phosphorus, aluminum, oxygen, chlorine, iron, sulfur, manganese potassium, sodium, zinc, lanthanum, cesium, and tritium. So whatever this substance is, it's clearly not naturally forming if it has all these elements and substances in them. So that alone is very interesting. I find the whole boron particularly interesting in the fact that it is used with nuclear materials. So perhaps that provides a little bit of an insight into what this stuff is. Paul Hill is a pioneering UFO researcher who is one of a few early scientists to study UFOs. He wrote the Scientific Study of UFOs, a very interesting book. And as he writes, when we know or suspect that a substance is a complicated molecular compound, it is very little knowledge to know that some of the atomic constituents are boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium. If this analysis were valid, angel hair would resemble fine wire and would not sublime at ambient temperatures. Among other things, the negative valence atoms are missing from this formulation. What is needed is an analysis of the molecular composition so that we will know the molecular compounds which form angel hair. So this still leaves us at somewhat of a dead end as to what exactly this is and how exactly it's formed. But there has been some interesting experiments that point towards this being sort of a byproduct of UFO engines. Scientists have produced what appears to be a similar substance using magnets and superconductors. And they can produce these fine filaments, though they haven't been able to produce them to the point where they remain for any length of time. So is it exhaust? Possibly. It's very hard to say. I find that very curious because it is so darn rare. When you consider the huge number of cases, there should be a lot more cases involving angel hair than there are. I mean, we've got hundreds of thousands of sightings and only a handful of angel hair cases. That's hard to reconcile. Perhaps the conditions are very rare, but people are seeing these on normal, bright, sunny days. So it's hard to say whether there's any special weather conditions that are causing this or whether it's a factor of the UFO itself. And another thing I find interesting is that at least 3 of these appear to be outright displays. And I'm wondering if they ejected this angel hair over that stadium in Italy, over Jerome Elementary School or Whitsett Elementary School on purpose. Is this intentional? I think any answer would be pure speculation at this point, but it does definitely appear to be connected to their very powerful engines. And whatever the explanation, it does provide sort of an interesting little insight into the nature of the UFO phenomena. And I think that alone makes it important, and that's why I wanted to do this video. At any rate, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And please keep having fun.